An executive coach is not typically an advisor, a problem solver, or a performance corrector. Rather, a coach is someone who helps with self-discovery, Don Zier says. Welcome to BoardVision, the official podcast of the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors. We share perspectives from leading corporate directors and explore what makes boards effective, including how they can help companies prepare for the future. In this episode, Zier, an executive leadership coach with Exco Group and a board member of Acorns, Hain Celestial Group, and Prestige Consumer Healthcare, sits down with NACD advisor Susan Paley to discuss the role of coaches in the governance ecosystem. They'll explore when and why a CEO or C-suite coach may be necessary or desired, why coaching is a positive thing for executive leadership, the board, and the company, and the board's role in establishing and supporting the success of a CEO-coach relationship. Have you heard about the benefits of NACD's certification program? Today's boards operate in a dynamic and rapidly evolving world. The National Association of Corporate Directors provides directorship certification that sets the standard for high-impact board directors. It's more than certification. This is the premier program, preparing directors to successfully navigate an increasingly complex business and governance landscape. NACD's directorship certification will enable you to demonstrate commitment, deliver confidently, and create real value for your organization. Learn more and apply today at nacdonline.org. And now, your host.
Don Zier, in the history of NACD's BoardVision podcast, I think this will stand out as a rather unusual conversation. And by that, I mean this. We are talking today with one another as two professional coaches. And I bet if we added 8 more people to the podcast, we'd have 10 of us, all with slightly different ways to define coaching. So let's clear up some confusion right from the top of the conversation. What, by your definition, is coaching? And further, how do I know if I'm being coached and if that's what I need, or if I need being advised or mentored or sponsored or anything else that we might throw in the pot of verbs?
Hi, Susan. This is great to be talking today. What is coaching? For me, it is a gift. So I think it's a gift that a company gives to an individual or a person gives to themselves that really gives them an opportunity to work with someone that's going to help them become the best version of themselves, that's going to hold them accountable in a private way. It's not someone that tells people what to do. Coaches are people that ask a lot of questions, that encourage self-reflection, but really and represent the best interests of the client that they're serving. I think there's a big difference between a sponsor. A sponsor to me is someone that normally sits within the company, that is often at a more senior level, that can help you rise in your career. A lot of people that become CEOs or that rise up in their career, we probably all have had sponsors that have made a difference for us. But a mentor, a coach, is that trusted sounding board and that person that helps you become the best version of yourself.
So how much of this is necessary to happen from the outside in? Let's say I'm a board member and I think my CEO needs a little bit of coaching. Would I just do that myself? I mean, I'm great at this stuff. Why don't I do it as the chair of the board? Why do we bring someone in from the outside?
It depends on the coaching. And again, most of the coaching that I do is working with very high potential people, working with CEOs that are being successful. There's no stigma attached to it anymore, or at least there shouldn't be. As a board director, it's hard to coach a CEO sometimes. Often a first-time CEO, someone on the board will become that coach. But you also want to create a place of safety for the CEO where they have someone that they can talk to about things that they might not want to be a board conversation. Often, one of the hardest things for a CEO to learn is how to manage those board CEO dynamics, and someone that has done that before or that has experience or understands governance very well often can help a first-time CEO with that work. And again, creating that safety area, that cone of trust where you know that we're having conversations where there's confidentiality and safety there for the CEO.
I couldn't agree more with you about the critical element of confidentiality and trust. We're really asking people to be vulnerable when they're in a conversation with a coach and to do that self-reflection, which can be kind of a very poignant moment. It hits close to the bone. And so I really love what you said about that outside element being a safe space. I'd also double click on the comment you said about no stigma. I think it's a little bit outdated to feel that there's a notion that coaching means maybe there's a problem, right? Usually people are remembering that the greatest athletes have coaches, the greatest leaders have coaches to become that better and best version of themselves along the journey.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think what you said about vulnerability is really true because often, and I'll share a story about myself. When I was a CEO, I brought in my own coach. I wasn't assigned a coach. I brought in my own coach just to kind of help me because I was a first-time CEO. I was navigating IR and communications for the first time. When you're a CEO, you work differently with your board than when you're just a member of the C-suite. So I brought in someone just to help me think through the first 90 days and someone that I really trusted and could share my thoughts with and that could help me be prepared. One of the things that I did when I went into the boardroom as a first-time CEO is I felt I had to be perfect. I felt I had to have everything buttoned up, wrapped up with a bow, tied and pretty to present to my board and to show them that I was here for a reason, that I deserved to be here as a first-time CEO, and that I could handle it all. I'm grateful because I actually got feedback from one of my board members, and my coach also talked to me about being vulnerable and how you don't have to go in perfect with a board. Actually, boards want to help and want to provide feedback and insight. And I found that instead of having all the answers, sometimes it's good to listen and get their input because you have a really talented group of people around you and you can get their feedback and they can help you shape solutions going forward. But that was a learning for me that I could actually be vulnerable with my board. That took building trust over time. But my coach helped me with that and helped me get to the place where I was very comfortable doing that.
It's funny. I didn't expect us to take this direction, but as you're talking, I have a little checklist in my head of almost like misnomers or misunderstandings. One of them was that you walked into your CEO role thinking, I need to be perfect and show the board that they made the right choice, right? Like that I've earned my spot. And you were gaining some insight through the coaching work, no doubt, through feedback that actually that may not be the case. And I wonder how that affected you and if you could put your shoulders down after that a little bit.
It helped a lot because I actually began to get a lot more from my board than I had been prior to that because I was using my board as a 4-time-a-year meeting, not taking advantage of their skill sets and not seeking their input. So it was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what we're basically saying is that between your board of directors and your coach, the coach can become a force multiplier, that you have yet another bit of outside-in insight and input. And I go back to the comment you made earlier about questions. When I come upon clients or leaders who want to themselves get coaching or send someone on their team to go get coaching, the misnomer that we clear up is that they think that it's advice. It's someone might come to a session saying, I'm having this problem. What do you think I should do? And in fact, it's asking coaches ask a lot of particularly powerful questions that help a person to kind of take a more powerful journey within that session to come up with the answer. And I wonder what happens in that session versus what happens in the couple weeks between sessions. Do you have any experience around what happens in that magic time between?
Well, I always say that as a coach, my job is to earn a spot where I'm on their speed dial. I want to earn that trust and respect with them that if something really good happens, they reach out to me and share it. Or if something, they had a bad day, they also reach out and say, oh, I did this, or I forgot that. You're trying to work on different behaviors or how people show up. So how people show up. One of the hardest things with being a CEO is you need to have that even keel as a CEO. And as we know, there are a lot of stressful situations when you're running a company. So how do you handle stress and how you show up with that even keel is something that I know coaches often work with their CEO clients with. The other is accountability. So when I was a CEO, yes, I reported to my board, but there wasn't a situation where every week they were telling me what to do. It's pretty hands off. And if you're running the company well, the board is involved, but they're not involved on a day-to-day business. They're not running the company, and you're holding yourself accountable. What I found as a CEO is that it was helpful to have a coach because he knew the different things that I was working on, the different things that I felt were the strategic priorities for the company. And we would have discussions around progression. And like everybody, CEOs are human. They want to focus on what they want to focus on, and some of the harder stuff like talent management. Have you handled your talent problem in this one area? And often those are the things that even CEOs move slowly on. So I find that a coach can go back, can revisit those pain points and help the CEO, push gently the CEO to make the decisions in a fast, pragmatic way.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the beauty of having a coach as a CEO, and that may touch on a lot of the topics that leaders typically need to work on, including CEO-specific areas like relationships with the board. What would be the difference between coaching a CEO and coaching others in the C-suite?
Often I work with people that are in the C-suite or C-suite -1, people that have been earmarked to have the potential to become the future CEO or have the potential to do more in the company. And a lot of things that we focus on, some of it is different, some of it is the same, but focusing on how to elevate executive presence, for example, is one of the most important things I work on with C-suite executives, their executive presence, how they show up, their communication. Now, this is something that we also work with CEOs on, but often CEOs have that training before they actually get in the seat. Stakeholder relationships. How are you working with your peers? How are you working with that C-suite, which, as we know, is not always easy. There are personalities in C-suites, a lot of type A people, and we need to learn how to work with everyone, and stakeholder relationships and spheres of influence are really important. Navigating a matrix is really important. Moving from being someone that manages a team to someone that generates followership, so important for a CEO, also important for a future CEO. And that is something a lot of people, I find, they don't understand how to generate or garner followership, something that we talk about a lot. So I would say stakeholder relationships, really making sure that you are developing the team for performance. You're no longer an individual contributor. You have a bigger purpose. Navigating that matrix. Prioritization. So important for both the CEO and the C-suite to make sure that everybody's clear on the goals and what the priorities are. And as a lot of us probably do as executives, we add priorities all the time. We have to be really deliberate and regimented in not doing that, and coaching can help with that. So there's a whole bunch of things, but I think the takeaway is making sure that the CEO or the C-suite executive is self-aware, overplayed strengths. Sometimes, especially in stressful situations, you can overplay those strengths and they become somewhat of a negative. So how do we work with people on that? Another thing that is happening more and more often is a lot of C-suite executives want to get on a board. So what does board readiness look like? What's the difference? And often we do that. Often I do that in addition to their C-suite role. How can you get more external facing to get on a board, which I think brings great input, pays back for a company. If you have people that are sitting on other boards getting external perspectives, it's very helpful because that feeds back into your performance as an executive.
Yes, I'm going to yes and you, Dawn. Yes to everything you just said. And the couple things that would make me want to underline them, I agree with everything you said about what topics we're working on in the coaching sessions, is that amen to the word followership. I have heard that more times in coaching sessions than I can count, and that's significant and important to today's organizations. The second most important thing, or even more important, is the stakeholder relationships. I just want to underscore that for me, it's interesting because you could take the phrase stakeholder relationships and maybe think that that's one thing. Okay, I got to figure out how to act. But it's, if you have 100 people, it's the relationships of 100 different flavors. So some people find they can speak up in some rooms, but they feel intimidated in other rooms, or they're told they're dominating in certain meetings, but not others. So it's, again, you mentioned self-awareness. And the third thing I mentioned ties into that, which is that I find that as a coach, something that people appreciate that sneaks up on us a little is that a coach can hold up a mirror and just, you can simply say, can I reflect back something that I heard in the conversation? And it might be a different way of listening for them, or a new aha for them.
I couldn't agree more. The other thing that people, even at very senior levels, aren't comfortable with is giving constructive feedback. So often your top leaders aren't giving the feedback they need to help mature the organization or really drive a high performing team. And so sometimes in the coaching sessions, you hear people talking about, oh, I wish so-and-so was doing this differently, and complaining, but not necessarily taking action, and getting somebody to be really good, helping people find a way to be really good and timely about giving constructive feedback. It's hard for people to do that. It's hard for board directors to do that. It doesn't get easier as we move up, but it is really a necessary thing that the best CEOs, the best C-suite leaders know how to do. And again, holding up that mirror, I love that phrase. Often that's what we're doing. Again, we're not telling people how to do things. We're reflecting back. We're talking about a lot of questions, right? We ask a lot of questions. Have you thought about this? How would you consider? How would you handle? How have you handled? How do you feel when this happens to you? So a lot of questions that really help them self-discover.
Yes. It's funny. You talked about people, even as we ascend the ladder, the highest levels of leadership, you'd assume that they're pros at giving feedback. Oh, they could do it in their sleep. Not so. It is kind of amazing how many folks are not practiced and equipped and comfortable. So you talked about it from one side of the angle, which is you're in a coaching session and that manager needs to get some coaching help around how to deliver feedback to their direct report, perhaps. I could also see it from the other angle. Many times I see that someone's been sent to coaching because the manager of that person didn't quite belly up to the bar and have a tough conversation. And so they're kind of outsourcing it a little bit. And what is helpful then is that sometimes we do, as a coach, a 360 assessment. So we get candid feedback from others. And it's a great gift, again, for someone to see what the perception is of them. You just put on sort of your anthropologist hat and say, okay, how do they see me? Do I want to change that perception? Do I not want to change that perception? And it helps the story that they understand.
I agree. I always tell people that you have the right to ignore feedback. That's your decision, but you should try to hear it. And again, that cone of confidentiality or that safe space, I love the idea of a coach doing 360 feedback because it's something that can be off the books, so to speak. So I might go talk to the manager, the head of HR, with permission, of course, or talk to people on their team just to get some feedback in an unofficial way. This doesn't get reported back up to the board or to the CEO if it's a direct report of the CEO, but this is such valuable input to get to know how you're coming across. And in today's environment, which is increasingly complex, and we hear a lot about C-suite burnout and C-suite stress, really understanding how you're coming across in different situations as a C-suite leader is critical because people come across differently in stressful situations than they do in everything's going great situations. But what is remembered is how you show up under pressure. And that's another thing that I find myself increasingly talking to my clients about.
You talked about the increased stress in our environment, which I'm sure everyone will agree with who's listening to this. I would emphasize something that you said in particular, which is that we come across in a way that may not be our intention, but as we ascend the ladder of leadership, the higher up we get in altitude, the more something that we thought was a whisper might be interpreted and heard as a shout.
Absolutely. I've had that experience myself where as a CEO, I would say something casually to someone on my team. And next thing you know, wheels are set in motion that I never intended. And things are starting to happen where it was just a casual conversation. So words matter. And it's true. The higher up you get, you need to be really careful about what you're saying as something you really want to do rather than just having a conversation that is more casual. And you learn that quick as a CEO.
Yeah. So we've talked about a number of interesting issues that might be tackled in coaching across an engagement, whether that's 6 months or a year. And it's a journey you take. However, we all know that CEOs love to measure success. It's how they've been, born and bred in terms of what success looks like. So how are goals set? Who sets them? Does one's boss have a say in that? Does one's board have a say in that? Does this coach co-partner? What happens with the goal setting for the coaching engagement?
It depends on who sets up the coaching assignment. So again, I feel getting feedback, and I would never go to if I was working with a CEO, I would never go directly to the board if I wasn't hired by the board without the CEO's permission, because you're not a spy. You're not there to report back. That sets up a really bad dynamic between the client and the coach. It really is that trusted relationship. But again, we have to remember that everybody is part of an enterprise. So while we set action plans with the C-suite executive that we're working with or the CEO, making sure that they fit with the overall enterprise strategy, especially with this is more C-suite than CEO, because CEO is a little different, is really important, because we could be working on things, but they also need to be telegraphed, and they need to be understood that this fits into what the company is looking for. Because if we're trying to position someone and help someone with succession to continue to rise up in a company, you need to understand what is really important to the company and how you're being perceived. So check-ins with the CEO or with the chief human resource officer periodically is fine. Not too so much. And what I tend to do in those sessions, I listen. I ask, have you noticed Joe, for example, showing up differently? Or what have you noticed over the last 6 months? Or sometimes I will say, we've been working on this, and have you seen that? But it's never without permission from the client that I'm working with. So I sort of know my boundaries going in. But when you're setting an action plan, again, it's different than here are the 5 goals for the company. We're not talking about increasing revenue by 5% and operating profit by 15%, things like that. It's really more developmental. We do stakeholder relationship mapping, and person A is a sponsor of mine. Person B might be a detractor, and how do I move them on the spectrum from right to left? That is something that is trackable and measurable. Executive presence. How are you showing up in meetings? Are you understanding what the key tenets are and working with them on that, and then getting feedback? So this feedback loop is really important, I think, as you go forward. But the actions, again, they're not about business goals. They're really about relationships, prioritization, culture, personal branding, all these things, executive presence.
Yes, I agree entirely. You're not a business coach coaching the business, you're coaching the person. What you're describing, I admittedly might be biased toward coaching because I've chosen it as my profession, but I think that it's an incredible, you used the word gift earlier, and I'll reinforce that. You end up having a thought partner, someone who's experienced, knowledgeable, who's really certified or equipped to have that conversation. And I can't imagine anyone turning that opportunity down. My question comes back to the question of people's perception. Sometimes a coach in the past had been employed for performance improvement. More often now, they're deployed for developmental help as a really great thing to go from great to greater or good to best. And the question I'm leading up to here is, I don't know if people still do want to boast about having a coach or would rather leave it private, but how public is it within the organization when a C-suite leader or a CEO has a coach they're working with? Who knows about it generally?
I think it depends, right? And it depends on the culture of the company that you're working at. So when I was the CEO of Nutrisystem, I was very clear that I had an executive coach that I had brought in and that I was working closely with and that was helping. And often I find the people I'm working with, they will introduce me to their teams and they'll want me to sit in on a different session, maybe facilitate something on executive presence or something along those lines. So it really depends on how the CEO or the C-suite leader wants to telegraph that. Again, I view it as a gift, so I tend to be very open about it. If it's someone, if you're regarded as a high performer, which again, I think if you're If it's a performance-based coaching, a fix-it situation, probably going to talk about it less. But at many companies, people are raising their hands. Joe has a coach. I want one too, because they understand that Joe is a high performer or Sally is a high performer. So it really depends on the culture of the company. But again, increasingly, I think it's something that is a signal of high potential rather than you're 1 foot out the door.
Agree 100%. I remember I had a senior executive who I was coaching, and when she arrived, she was trying to keep it quiet. She wasn't quite sure. She was a little skeptical. And when she left the coaching engagement 6 months later, she was like the poster child at that organization for coaching. She's like, everyone should go to coach. I'm signing up my whole team. And so there's sort of, the answer is not always static. People can change their minds about it. But I also want to emphasize one tiny thing that you said, Dawn, and just backtrack for a second to create clarity. When you said, I tend to be open about having a coach, you were saying that from the seat of your former CEO role at Nutrisystem, that you were open. You would not be open as a coach. You're sworn to confidentiality, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Again, I won't talk to anyone about the coaching relationship or share any content or anything along those lines unless I have the approval of the C-suite leader. Now, it's interesting sometimes because often I'm green-lighted by my client to have a conversation with their CEO or someone on their board, and my job is to illustrate points that they want emphasized. So I often become an amplifier of my client's messaging to hit home certain points of progress or certain things that are being worked on or that are important. So again, you can use your coach in different ways, but that direction always comes from the client in terms of what they want you to say, what they don't want you to say. Are you someone that they want people to know about or not?
Yeah, I loved your word amplifier. There's a great deal of confidentiality in this relationship. And, you can ask a lot of why questions to get to the heart of what somebody really does want, what their heart's desire is. Mm-hmm. So let's talk for a second about the way you land in that seat of being face-to-face with a coach, whether it's in person or on Zoom or phone. How would one go about finding a coach?
I call it a chemistry meeting. So often with the Exco group that I work with, we'll have chemistry meetings where we understand what each coach brings to the table, understand the client and what their needs are, and there's a match of who we think would be good to work with that person. I've seen situations where, again, because trust is so important, if you don't find someone that you as a CEO or a C-suite leader feel that you can genuinely connect with, it's not going to work because so much of the relationship is about vulnerability and trust.
Would the board play a role in finding some candidates for coaching or some coach candidates to work with the CEO or the C-suite? What kind of role does a board play in that part of it or at all in the coaching?
I see the board most often get involved with a first-time CEO where they say it would be helpful if you had someone that has sat in the seat before or that has experience. Many people know people that do that, so a lot of it can come through networking or recommendations, similar to the way people get on board seats very often. If the company always uses a certain coaching firm, that's a way to do it. But again, that individual that you're paired with is what's most critical. I don't see it very successful if it's often said, hey, Mary, you should work with Jill.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that very often it's your network, it's your word of mouth, it's your friends who you've seen successfully engaged that might recommend people to try. And then I'm the same way as you. We have a chemistry conversation, and I like it when they're interviewing more than one coach and they get to decide. It's so important that the coachee has genuine buy-in and they want to be with that person in a room every other week or whatever the cadence may be.
That's right.
Speaking of that, what are your usual experiences around how often you meet with your client and for how long duration-wise?
I try to set up a call or an in-person, depending on location. So virtual team meetings where you're actually on video, I try to do every other week. Sometimes it moves to a longer cadence or sometimes slightly less depending on what's going on. But I also say that I'm available 24/7 to the person. Text me, call me. I'll always drop whatever I can and hop on a call as soon as possible if there's something urgent going on. So in the thick of something, if something is happening, it could be 5 times in a week. And it may be 20-minute touch bases. It may be phone calls. It may be video calls. Could be a host of different things. That's when you're in the moment. If I'm working off the action plan and we're trying to work through different things on the action plan, because so often real life happens and you're dealing with the topic of the client's choice, not necessarily what's on the action plan, but always try to get back to that and review that and make sure we're touching on those points that are why we originally started the coaching and constantly updating that going forward. But I think an every other week cadence and then speed dial is what works for me.
Yeah, I agree. I had the same experience. It tends to be every other week, or most coaches I know do something akin to that, or twice a month, as they describe.
Yeah, and an hour, generally for like an hour, sometimes can run a little longer.
Yeah. I'm smiling as I listen to our conversation in one aspect in particular, which is that here we are talking about coaching in a podcast that's really part of the NACD world, which is about board leadership, and the overlaps or similarities are uncanny. Your coach and your board are both going to ask you a lot of questions. Your coach and your board are both going to be holding you accountable. And your coach and your board are, like you just described, meeting with you regularly on a logical, reasonable cadence. But if things are going down, they're talking to you every night, 5 days a week. It's having a very friendly, personal, person in your corner, as it were.
Absolutely. And also a sounding board for how you might want to approach the board. So a coach often, I would run ideas when I was a CEO by my coach on how do I want to bring this forward? How do I want to talk about this? Or I feel like I'm getting pressure here. I'm not entirely aligned. Help me reframe this. Help me think through how to reframe these conversations so they can hear me and I can hear them better. Those are important things that you wouldn't have that conversation with the board because you're going in prepared. But with coaching, it's not often about the what, it's often about the how, right? How you do something and helping people think through how to get the outcome that they want or that they need in, especially with board dynamics, how to manage that. If you have a difficult board member, if you have a board that is divided, if there's so many ifs with boards, and managing a board is a big part of the CEO's job.
Yeah. And so you mentioned a couple of, let's call them isolated incidents, like I need to be heard differently in a meeting, or I need to navigate this dynamic. Beyond just those individual events, how does that coaching experience become the wind beneath their wings for the entirety of a CEO board relationship at large?
I think it's through focusing on, again, being that trusted partner and that sounding board ahead of the board meeting, because as coaches, we know a lot about what's going on, again, fully in confidence, but executive presence, how you show up. Are you sounding defensive to me? Because if I sense you're sounding defensive as I'm asking you hard questions, imagine how your board will be hearing you. So it comes down to coaching and working on that executive gravitas, on the stakeholder relationships, which is not only your team, it is your external community, your external stakeholders, it is your board, and really working through all that. And again, I also think the priorities, making sure that as a CEO, you're thinking through those priorities and you're not just accepting or adding different priorities that create tension for the team or difficulty for the team to focus on what really matters to move the company forward.
Yeah, it's a beautiful practice. It really is. And we had a trusted space today and we're sharing it with thousands of listeners. So we know that's happening and maybe there's a ripple effect.
Let's hope so.
Thanks so much, Dawn, for joining us. So delighted to talk to you.
Same here. Thank you.
That concludes this episode of BoardVision. We hope you enjoyed listening. Please subscribe and join us next time. Until then, visit nacdonline.org to stay informed about the latest resources NACD has to offer, such as memberships, certification, national or chapter events, and our content, including reports, articles, and Directorship magazine. That's nacdonline.org. Thank you for listening.